Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's meeting of the West Devon Borough Council Hub Committee. Good to see so many people here, allowing for the restrictions that we're operating under, so it's nice to be back. If we can move straight on with the agenda, item 1 is apologies for absence. I have one, Mr. Wright, from Councillor Ratcliffe. I don't think there are any others. Everybody else seems to be present. So
that's correct. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you. Item 2, members' declarations of interest. Members are invited to declare any personal or disclosable pecuniary interests, including the nature and extent of such interests they may have in any items to be considered on the agenda. Are there any interests that anyone would like to declare? Councillor Pearce.
Mine is an interest, Chairman. I'm just wondering how those of us who are on the DM committee stand if we support the item 7, whether it can be viewed as predetermination when we come to the DM meeting.
I'm glad you've raised that, Councillor Pearce. I've checked this item with Mr. Fairbairn. Mr. Fairbairn has advised that, in his view, there's nothing that anyone needs to worry about. That there is case law that supports that view, that members of DMNL are clearly not going to be prejudging any planning application before an application is submitted, and that being a member of another committee that has determined to submit a planning application does not prejudice your ability to take part in the DMNL committee. So I think you're fine, Councillor Pearce.
Thank you for that clarification, Chairman.
Thank you. If we can move on to item 3, Mr. White has circulated an item requiring urgent attention, which will be on your ModGov papers. It's in relation to the West Devon Transport Hub in Oakhampton and the Levelling Up Fund bid. So the paper has been circulated. It's in connection with the West Devon Integrated Transport Hub, towards which we are submitting a bid under the Levelling Up Fund for around £12 million, working with Devon County Council, Network Rail and GWR. Matched funding for this bid is being considered by the Cabinet at Devon County Council tomorrow, and we require to get approval for Mr. Brooke to submit the application on our behalf, because it will go in before the next Hub Committee meeting. The bid is supported by Mel Stride MP and other local MPs, and the paper sets out the process and the timescale that will be adopted. It's certain that this will be a challenging bid. It tends to be the case that applications for this type of project to do with railways do tend to be quite challenging, both in terms of timescale and cost, and this one will be no different, but it has the potential for huge benefits for Oakhampton and for West Devon and for the region as a whole. It's clearly something that we have discussed to some extent before, and I think it is something we really must pursue and will pursue. But are there any questions, members, before we go further? I'm not getting any questions coming forward, in which case, if I can get to the right part of the page, I would like to propose the recommendation that is contained within the document, that the Hub Committee is recommended to approve the submission by the Director, Place and Enterprise of an application to the Levelling Up Fund for capital funding for the West Devon Transport Hub in Oakhampton, as outlined in section 2 of the report. Could I have a seconder for that recommendation, please?
I'm happy to second that.
Thank you. Members, any debate?
I've got one question, perhaps Chris Brooks could answer. I know there's no financial implication for us as a council directly, but there is presumably a huge amount of work that's required to do to push this project uphill. Is that causing any difficulty or sacrificing of other work that might otherwise be going on?
Thank you, Leader, and Councillor Cheadle. No, the organisation is fairly flexible. In the same way as we flex for grants and we flex for the Community Renewal Fund, we've flexed to support this and we'll continue to do so. Clearly it's a challenge, but that's what you expect of your staff in this organisation. So I'm confident we'll be fine. Thank you.
I think it's fair to say, Mr. Burke, that we've had a good degree of support from Devon County Council over this whole process, and Network Rail and GWR are also pitching in and doing their bit. We had a very good meeting recently at which the intention of all parties to work together to bring this about was set out, and everyone is really committed to it. So we have had help from lots of people, and the benefits of working together, I think, being seen quite clearly. So, and thank you, Mr. Brooke, to your team for your work on it. Any other debate, members? Councillor Pearce.
Thank you, Chairman. I think we'd be very silly not to support this. If we are successful in obtaining this money, the benefits long-term and for a huge area of our community, our West Devon communities, is going to be, tremendous. So I think we should be backing it, really strongly. And I thank Mr. Brooke for his optimism there. I think really, because this is so important, if we find that we are stretched resource-wise, we need to make some funding available to support officers working on this, because it really is a major, major plan. So that is my view, Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Pearce. Any other comments, members? In which case...
Leader, sorry, before you do, I've got a submission from Councillor Yelland via email.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. White.
Thank you, members. So this is from Councillor Yelland. As I shall be watching the live stream on YouTube and therefore won't be able to speak directly at Hub, I should like to put on record my thanks to the officers for the work that has been put into this submission. As the WDBC rep to Oakie Rail, I know how vitally important it is to both the local and the wider community that the transport hub is built out as soon as possible, and sourcing external funding is essential. Sourcing external funding is essential to ensure this can happen. Once built, it will serve to both alleviate the pressures on Station Road in terms of traffic congestion and parking, and ensure that those who have expressly stated their desire to use the service from North Cornwall and further afield will be able to do so easily and efficiently. Having the new transport hub very close to the junction with the A30 will protect the town centre, minimise localised congestion and enable wider connectivity. As a ward member for Oakhampton, this application has my full support. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you, Mr. White, and thank you, Councillor Yelland. I think that's noted and understood. Any other comments, members? In which case, I think we will move to a vote. So, all those in favour of the recommendation?
That is 8 and unanimous. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you. If we could move to item 4, the minutes of the previous meeting, if we can go through those for accuracy and completeness. Anything on page 1, members? Page 2. Page 3. Page 4. Page 5. Page 6. And page 7. No one wishes to raise any comments, and is it the case I can take those as being a full and complete record of the meeting? Thank you. If you could note that, Mr. White.
Thank you, Leader.
Item 5 is public questions. I've had nothing brought to my attention in terms of public questions.
That's correct, thank you, Leader.
Item 6, Hub Committee Forward Plan has been circulated. I have, together with Mr. White and his team, produced a revised version of that plan which updates the names that are given to the various lead member areas, and that will be circulated in due course. But does anybody have any questions about the forward plan or anything that is on the forward plan at this stage? If not, I think we can accept that as noted, Mr. White.
Thank you, Leader.
Item 7 is a project update regarding Spring Hill and the redevelopment of a homeless provision. In the absence of Councillor Ratcliffe, I'm going to present this if I may. You'll have in front of you a paper which sets out our plan to redevelop the building we currently own at Spring Hill in Tavistock. It is a building that, as I said, is currently owned by the council. It does have a restrictive covenant and can't be used for anything else other than the purpose for which we are intending it to be brought forward. The present building is not fit for purpose. We have taken pre-application advice, and our aim is to create 11 self-contained apartments in a new build on this site, but to ensure that heritage considerations will remain at the forefront of our planning. We're now seeking agreement to submit plans for an application to rebuild on this site a building that will be fit for purpose and will provide the accommodation that we need for homeless families. The information is contained within the report in front of you, and members, I'd like to ask if anyone has any questions about this proposal. Councillor Mott.
Thank you, Chair. Can I just have clarity, please? On page 13, some of the recommendations are missing on the bottom of the page.
Thank you, Councillor Mott. I had assumed it was one line that was missing, well, half of one line. So I had taken it as read that everything was there, and that the final line actually reads, if I can find it, outdoor space for residents, and there's nothing below that.
That's fine. I just wanted to be clear that there was nothing below that.
Yeah. Thank you. Any other questions, members? Councillor Hipsey.
Thank you, Leader. Can I just confirm, unfortunately my laptop's not working and I haven't got the report therefore in front of me, but I have read it. Can I confirm, please, that, or clarify, Tavistock Town Council's attitude to this project, please?
The project at the moment is at a stage where it has not yet been submitted as an application. There have been considerable pre-application work done within the council, including with the Heritage Officer and the Planning Department. At the point when the application is made, I would assume that the Town Council will be invited for its comments as a statutory consultee.
Thank you. So they haven't discussed it at all yet, as far as you're aware?
I don't know whether Mr. Field can enlighten me at all, but I don't believe so.
Thank you, Leader. They are aware of it. We've had very light touch email communication, and the last part, which was probably about 2 weeks ago, I reinforced that, on the point of submitting a planning application, we would invite them for a site visit for those who are interested.
Splendid. That's the clarification I was looking for. Thank you.
Any other questions? Councillor Daniel.
Could I ask, are we going to make sure that we recycle as much of the traditional materials that have been used as possible? Because I think that might be where objections would be raised.
Yeah, I think we're very aware that objections may be raised on that. The design detail is yet to be completed, but we are talking very carefully with the Heritage Officer, and as I think I said in my preamble, the heritage aspects of this are really important to us. We really want to make a building that is fit for purpose and provides an excellent service to those people that need it, but also to do something that's in keeping with the area and with due consideration to the World Heritage Site status. There are plans to reuse some of the stone, for example, but the actual details of that won't come forward until we put the specific detailed plans together. There will be opportunity for consultation and feedback on that when the time comes as part of the planning process. Councillor Mott.
Thank you, Chair. I take it as part of that process we are not going to make this project so ludicrously expensive that it actually becomes unviable to continue.
No, it has to be practical as well, and has got to be fit for purpose. There will be a further stage when the planning application is put together where it will come back to Hub and to Council with the budgetary implications, and that will give us an opportunity to look at that at that stage. Councillor Edmonds.
Thank you, Chair. The report talks about increasing demand for temporary accommodation, no doubt partly due to the pandemic. In 2.10 of the report, it says that these needs are not met by the existing provision and rarely able to be met in alternative temporary accommodation in the local area. So my first question is, what is the existing provision? And does it include a property owned by the council in Oakhampton?
Thank you, Councillor. I might call on Mrs. Blake to answer this one if I may. Mr. Cobbleddick, to answer this one. My understanding is there's usage of provision in bed and breakfast accommodation at the moment, but perhaps you could enlighten us with a bit more detail.
That's true. We do own one property in North Road in Oakhampton. That's the only one that we own that is actually suitable for families at the moment, because it's the only one that's a self-contained property. The family provision we tend to be using at the moment is Tavistock trout fisheries. Yeah, so we've got some holiday home accommodation that we use that's very, very expensive, but is self-contained and therefore suitable for families. And we have bed and breakfast provision largely through the travel lodges, which again is very expensive and not suitable for families.
Thank you. I'm sure we can all agree that a family which is in that situation, bed and breakfast is really the basic they must have and is really not suitable. So something along the lines of what we're now proposing would be a real benefit both to them and I think to the borough.
Well, thank you, Chair. Yes, and you're absolutely right, and the report reflects that, because at 2.13 it says that demand for temporary accommodation is increasing and Spring Hill could support the majority of required placements throughout the year. So clearly there is a strong need for this accommodation, for this project to complete. So if I go to 6.10, there is a very helpful timetable there for the for the project, and it indicates, if it gets the go-ahead, a 15 to 18 months construction period. So, given the importance of this accommodation, how confident are we, and it's probably a very difficult question to ask, but given everything that's happening in the world, and the importance of hitting this timescale, how confident are we that this is realistic?
Can I ask Mr. Field to answer that one?
Yes, thank you, Leader. We are as confident, as you say, as we can be. In terms of the construction period, we've had early engagement with contractors who have looked at the site and the constraints. So that's where the 15 to 18 months come from. Obviously, the key thing will be, should we go to planning, how that goes. But we've included the need to go to committee. So, yes, if all those milestones are hit, we are confident. And with the current sort of construction industry prices, thankfully, we're not asking for those tomorrow. So that should hopefully help us as well in terms of our business case. So we are as confident as we can ever be, but we have done further due diligence to get to this point.
Thank you. Any other questions, members? Councillor Ewings.
I was just asking about the front facade, particularly of the building, and as it goes up the hill. That is where the main concerns will be about the heritage, etc., because the hospital has got a similar facade to it. And as some of us know, the views from this building are going across, and the hospital are just incredible. They really are incredible views, the whole valleys and the moors and everything. But it is just that front facade, I think, that is quite important. And as the Conservation Heritage Officer, there is wording early in the report that demolition is deemed to be acceptable. It also talks about a public consultation. I don't seem to see anything within the document about a public consultation. So do I assume that the public consultation is the planning application when that goes in?
Yes, you're right to assume that, Councillor. The consultation will take part as part of the normal planning process. So, yeah, I mean, obviously we're taking advice from the planning department, we're taking advice from the heritage officer. We will put together a very sympathetic scheme, and that will then be subject to the normal considerations, including that period of consultation and consultation with the statutory consultees, including the World Heritage Site, the Town Council, and so on. So okay. Yes, that's the intention of that part of the planning process.
May I just ask then that with the significance of the building, and not everybody picks up on a planning application, that maybe we do a press release to say this is going to planning and people can express their views within dates, etc.
Thank you. I've noted that, and we'll obviously talk to the lead member and Mr. Field and the team about that, because I think it would benefit us to get maximum consultation on it and interest in the planning process, because it's a very important development. Any other questions, members? Sorry.
Given that the schedule in the paper is that planning application is going to be submitted on the 2nd of... planning application, it says in the paper, is going to be submitted on the 2nd of July, which is only 3 weeks away. I therefore presume that and it's a full planning application, so all the detail precisely of what we intend to do with this building and the way it will look on completion, as it were, are sort of in the bag in that sense. I mean, all the internal discussions on the planning application must be complete by now, I guess. Is that the case?
Yes, that's correct. We've gone through a process and we're in the detailed design phase. That's done through a model as well. So all of our planning documents are drafted, all the drawings are drafted. We've given the pre-app a wide range of those drawings, but not all of them. The details are there. There's a few tweaks, but we're confident that we can turn that around in 3 weeks if we're able to. But clearly, if we need to delay that for the right reason, then we will. But it's just having that confidence that we can move forward in the detailed design.
Thank you. Councillor Crozier.
Further to that observation, the tender issue has got a typo there, because I believe that's 2021, not 2022.
Thank you. Okay, any other questions, members? In which case, I'd like to move the recommendations 1 and 2 on page 13 of your agenda papers. Could I have a seconder for that, please?
Happy to second.
Thank you. Members, any debate? Councillor Leach.
Just quickly, I'm fully... Sorry. I'm fully behind this development. I think the facilities are needed, desperately needed, so we shouldn't hold this up. My only concern is, as Elton said, the facade. And I've said previously, the front of that property is very distinctive, especially the vertical columns and the round row infill panels. Any design needs to get as close to that as possible. Otherwise, it will stick out like a sore thumb.
Thank you, Councillor Leach. It's noted. Can I just apologise? I moved the recommendation, and the recommendation should have been for the 3 items that are on page 13 and not the 2. I'll just make that absolutely clear. Thank you, Councillor Leach. That's noted. Any other debate, members? Councillor Edmonds.
Thank you, Chair. Well, there is a real need for this accommodation. I think that's understood by us all. The indications from the pre-up, the comments from that seem very encouraging. So I would sincerely hope that whilst we carefully address any heritage concerns, that we do not allow this point to hinder the progress of providing much needed temporary accommodation for residents across the borough. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Edmonds. Any other comments? Councillor Daniel.
Sorry, it's a question, but I just wanted to ask about the covenant on the building, and I heard it mentioned before that it can only be used for homeless people. So I'm just wondering if it wasn't approved, what we would do with it. Would we go try again, or is there any plans for that?
I don't know whether there's any comment Mr. Field might like to make, but the building at the moment, as the last time I saw it, certainly wasn't fit for anything. So, it, I guess, would sit there as an unused building, which would be a great shame, particularly as West Devon Borough Council is paying rates on it, council tax on it at the moment. I don't know whether you want to add anything to that, Mr. Field.
Thank you, Leader. Really just to add that the covenant owner is the NHS, and we have been in contact. We are in constant contact with their estates team, and there's broad acceptance for our scheme and for sort of pushing that covenant onto the new building. So we're confident that that won't be an issue. But obviously, until we get to the planning permission stage, they won't necessarily release that. But we're confident, and we've had the consultation with them.
Thank you. Any other debate, members? In which case, if I may, we'll go to a vote. So all those in favour of the recommendations?
That's 8 unanimous. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you. Members, if we can move on to item 8 on your agenda papers, which is Climate Change and Biodiversity Action Plan Update. And if I could ask Councillor Daniel to please introduce this item.
Yes. When the Council agreed a Climate and Biodiversity Action Plan in 17th of December 2019, we developed it and it was progressed.
Councillor Daniel,
sorry.
if you could move your microphone down a little bit, that would be much better. Thank you.
Yes, so the Council agreed and developed that. So on the 8th of December 2020, we brought the report, and the Council agreed that we would continue with this. But the plan is flexible, so we will be amending it as we go along. And today we have a report about what has happened so far, which I would. It's a continually evolving document, and the officers have formed a community forum, which is, I think has met twice so far, which involves representatives from the local community to come together to talk about plans that they might like to see the council doing, and also a bit of scrutiny about how well we're doing with our climate and biodiversity plan. So the key progress we've made is the additional £400,000 in Green Home grants, with a combination of air source heat pumps and external wall insulation. And we produce monthly biodiversity and climate change newsletters for councillors, and I hope for the forum as well. And we're going to look at further public engagement with what we did do further public engagement with Carbon Savvy, taking lessons from the campaign to strengthen it. We've undertaken an energy audit of the buildings and carbon literacy training for our management and leadership teams. So there's also a proposed way forward here. We're looking at well-being, climate change and biodiversity in our corporate strategy. There's also, as we know now, the new hub seat, natural environment, of which I'm the lead. We've got a lot of aspirations and plans for what we would like to achieve over the next 2 years in conjunction with the joint local plan, natural environment policy. And we will be having advisory groups within each new hub seat, and the natural environment advisory group will hopefully feed into our climate and biodiversity plan and continue to evolve this and find achievable goals for the next 2 years, as well as a long-term plans such as these shared way, the cycleways across West Devon. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Daniel. Members, are there any questions about the report that is in front of you? Councillor Mott.
Thank you, Chair. I've got a few questions, please, with regard to the appendix. So on page 77, 1.3, where it states that we're going to review strategic scale solar, wind and hydro energy. Can I ask, is that for us to develop or for others? And is this the same as repeated further down in the report? I've got a question then about, so I don't know if you want to do these one by one or if you want the list of them now.
Should we deal with them one by one? And Councillor Daniel or any officers available who could answer that question? Mr. Thanks, Adam.
Yeah, so with the action around reviewing strategic solar, wind and hydro energy for commercial and community energy, this is kind of a preliminary work we'll need to do as part of the joint local plan review to identify where the possibility for those sites could be. So we might be in a position to allocate for those sites if there's opportunities based on grid constraints and things like that. So it could be things that we could develop, or the information is there for commercial operators to develop as well.
Thank you. There's interest there that you said about could be developed if there were grid constraints, and presumably, therefore, if there are grid constraints, there will be no big developments of that nature.
Yeah.
Thank you. Councillor Mott.
Thank you. The 1.6, how can we assure residents that these schemes are genuine under promote and administer grants for home insulation, etc.?
Mr. Powell.
Yeah, I can pick that up, Leader. I mean, I think you're alluding to the fact there is a number of schemes out there where people sort of cold call and sort of try and connect to the local authorities to make their proposal genuine. Clearly, we work closely with SSE, who are our main partner at the moment, to ensure that there is a link with headed paper from West Devon, and also that if people want to follow up that call, that our staff are aware and they can confirm the fact that it is true. it is a difficult challenge, but it's clear the partners that we're working with and the ones that we aren't working with.
I would argue that latter point in that when last round of schemes were announced, I had several calls and messages regarding these schemes as to whether they were genuine or not. I do think that we need to come up with something so that residents can be assured that any given scheme is a genuine one that is being supported by us and not a scam one.
Thank you. Mr. Powell.
Yes, no, I really do recognise the problem. At the moment, as you see in the main body of the report, the actual the money we've had in for the Green Homes grants, the supply line and the supply chain for that is quite slow. It's a national challenge. So when we actually start to install, at the moment we've got about 350 leads relevant for that scheme. When we start installing, then we'll be doing publicity as well through the comms team to ensure that they know who we're working with and who we're not working with, essentially.
Thank you. Can I ask a supplementary question on that, Mr. Powell? The schemes that we're promoting, are they particularly targeted at individuals with low income, or does income not come into the equation? I think we all anecdotally know lots of people who've got plenty of capital and plenty of money who have subsidised solar panels and virtually free electricity, whilst those on lower incomes are still having to pay the normal rates. Is there anything within the scheme that directs those schemes towards people with lower incomes?
Yeah, there's a sort of range of different schemes that are offered by us directly and by partners. Everything we're involved with is for people on lower incomes or in vulnerable situation in the most poorly energy efficient properties. So that's very much the way that money has to go. But on top of that, you will see schemes around things like for able to pay, as it were, for solar and PV. So those are things we support because they're good from a renewable energy point of view and a carbon point of view, but we don't finance any of those schemes.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions, members? Keep going, Councillor Mott.
Apologies, everyone. So the new action 1.7, you're saying that we're going to actively support the local energy bill. How can we support a bill that isn't actually in existence yet? I understand that's only just gone through its first reading, and yet to go through its second before it starts its merry journey through the Lords and everything else. And I would also like to query point 2 with regard to farmers wishing to use the land for renewable energies. Surely we should wait for the release of the new ELM scheme to be finalised so that we can see what incentives there are in there.
Mr. Powell.
I think it's me, sorry, we were just picking up. In terms of it's in principle, it's a new activity, as I think was pointed out by Councillor Dan at the beginning. This is very much a evolving plan. Things go onto it, things come off it. In principle, the local energy bill is something that I think members would want to support, as opposed to other bills that are out there perhaps aren't so appropriate. In terms of the business rates element and ELMS, we had that first discussion, Councillor Mott, I think we attended, where to try and work out what we can do in terms of supporting agriculture and agriculture supporting this agenda. So it's an ongoing piece of work. And we will update the plan to make sure that any actions in there are smart and deliverable when we know a little bit more. So, an evolving plan.
Thank you. 2.13, where we're on about support and encourage community small-scale anaerobic digesters. How are we going to ensure the safety of these, as most pollution incidences have been from these small-scale digesters?
Well, that will just come about as and when these projects start to come forward, really. So they'll need to go through the appropriate channels through the Environment Agency to make sure they've got the right permits and things like that. But it's just one of those things where it's another type of renewable energy activity that can support properties that are off-grid or small hamlets that are in those more remote areas.
I'm sorry, I don't think you actually answered my question. How are we going to ensure the safety of them, that they're not going to cause pollution? But these places already have permits, they are already monitored by the Environment Agency, yet they still pollute. How are we going to ensure, when we're promoting these things, that we are not going to encourage or, have more pollution?
Well, I mean, I would have thought it'd just be through the monitoring process that they have to adhere to as part of their permitting regulations.
I suspect it is an Environment Agency function, but I'm not quite sure at this stage what our involvement might be. Mr. Powell.
Yeah, I mean, it certainly is an Environment Agency permitting function, but obviously, Councillor Mott, you're saying that there's issues with these even when they have a permit, so I think it's something we'd need to look into a bit further. If we're supporting something, we want to ensure that there's no adverse side effects. Responsibility for enforcing it lies with the Environment Agency, and if they're not doing that properly, that's something we would, want to have a discussion with them. In fact, over the next couple of weeks, I've got a discussion with Helen Dobby from the EA about their climate change agenda and our agenda, and I could raise the issue at that point if that would help.
Thank you, that would be good. So you'll be pleased to know there's only two more. 3.5 on page 80, under ring fencing and promoting a percentage of members' grant schemes. Can I ask when that was decided, please? And is it not for members to see how they want to use their allocation in their communities?
Powell?
Well, no, it's not been decided, Councillor Mott. It's there within there. There's no progress, as you've seen on the action plan. It's one of the ideas that came forward from the Climate Change Working Group and was adopted as part of an action to explore back in December. Clearly, any suggestion of doing that would have to come forward and get members' approval.
Thank you. And then finally on 4.1, page 81, can I ask for the link to be circulated to members so that we can publish that further and try and get those subscriber numbers up?
Yeah, that's fine.
Thank you. Thank you. Members, any other questions? Councillor Edmonds.
Thank you, Chair. Chair, I've got three questions here that have been handed to me by a member who's not able to attend this afternoon's meeting. Do I have your permission to ask those three questions on their behalf?
I'd be very happy for you to do that, Councillor Edmonds.
And apologies, these may have already been partially raised and answered, so apologies if I'm repeating them. So we're on page 77, 1.7, which is about local energy support. And the three questions are these. Do farmers pay business rates? Are we wanting to encourage more solar farms stroke wind turbines? And finally, are solar farms and wind turbines good or bad for biodiversity? And if I may, I'll follow up with one of my own questions, please.
Thank you. Adam.
Yeah, so with the business rates, from what I understand from conversations I've had with the NFU, is that business rates are payable as soon as a farmer might want to develop some of their land for renewable energy generation that's over and above their need to produce on site, so if they're exporting energy essentially. So there could be a mechanism there to encourage landowners to come forward if they want to produce renewable energy for the borough. And sorry, the second question was about the solar wind farm. Yeah, I mean, it's a right location, right site sort of thing, really. So obviously, wind turbines can impact on avian populations sometimes, but there are locations where they're more appropriate depending on the design and siting of the wind turbine. So again, it's always on a site-by-site basis.
Yeah, thank you. And perhaps just this one, are we wanting to encourage more solar farms than wind turbines?
Well, it's certainly something we need to do in terms of lowering the district's carbon emissions to produce more energy locally. And I know that there's certain things going on out there in terms of having community energy generated within borough and distributed locally as well.
Could I add something to that, please, Chair?
Please, Mr. Powell.
I think if we look at the plan that we've got as a council, we've got three key components. One is to look at our own carbon footprint as an organisation, and we've set a target for 2030. So that's looking at what we do, and we're actively looking at a lot of the projects are coming forward to reduce our carbon footprint and put forward that community leadership element of that. You've then got our biodiversity target, which similarly will be on our own land. And then you've got the 2050 target, which is one we share clearly with Devon and all the other partners who've signed up to the Devon Climate Emergency. So I think strategic energy in terms of solar, renewables and others is something that we would generally be pushing through the Devon Carbon Plan rather than locally. And obviously, any applications that came forward in our area would have to deal through the planning process. So it's a combination. We're actively pursuing our own carbon footprint at the moment and waiting for the Devon Carbon Plan to go through and go through the citizens' assemblies and the sort of final products to come through there. Because strategically, they work with the Devon Carbon Plan, work with BEIS and all the other government organisations, which from a strategic energy point of view is the best way.
Does that help, Councillor Evans?
Yeah, I'm just wondering, are we going to, will members, will we formulate this into some sort of policy? Will there be a policy put forward that we are actively encouraging, wind turbines, solar farms? Are we going to move to a policy position? Will that come forward from members to debate, or is this just a suggestion, an idea as part of this action plan?
Yeah, so those larger scale wind farms and solar developments will need to come through the planning process, and it'll be something we probably want to review as part of the joint local plan to make sure that if we do identify these larger scale installations, they can come through the policy allocation work as part of that review.
Okay. May I just have one further question, which is on page 78, 2.11. And I think it's just clarification of a previous response to a question, just so that I'm absolutely clear. 2.11 says, allocate sites for renewable energy, in particular strategic scale solar and wind for both commercial and community energy development. Some work is already underway and brief developed, ready for tender. So I'll come back to that question. Are we talking about here, when it refers to commercial, are we talking about solar and wind turbine development in the borough? Or is that what we are promoting? Is that what we are indicating with this action point?
Yes, so this is looking at identifying where those opportunities are first.
That's an interesting that's a very interesting concept because I'm a veteran of 4 wind turbine applications in my ward, and sadly I still bear the scars. So, personally, I would welcome a meaningful discussion and debate on this particular suggestion or action point, because these, in my experience, are deeply divisive projects, and I would simply have no appetite, and I'm fairly confident, nor would my residents, to re-enter that debate. And I'm not sure where government policy is, but I felt that that type of development could not proceed unless there was clear commitment from the community in question.
Thank you, Councillor.
Yes, so that works. The work is being led by the joint local plan team, so it will need to go through those processes. And this isn't a case of these things popping up out of nowhere and being done without kind of community engagement. Those sorts of things needs to go through the planning process first. But for us to identify what sort of sites might be appropriate as part of a scoping exercise for site allocations, then that work does need to be done as part of the joint local plan review.
Are we compelled to do that work, or not? Who is saying that we have to do that work as part of the JLP, or should that be decided by the members of this council that is the direction which they wish to take the policy?
So it's being led by the joint local plan team, as I said before. But that's sort of, when the joint local plan review starts coming through to members, then there will obviously be opportunity for debate at that time.
think that it is sounding to me as though it's something that the Natural Environment Advisory Group, when they convene and have a discussion, Councillor Dundee might want to have some discussion around that and formulate a position informed by other members of the council. So I think that's something we should move forward with in due course, Councillor Edmonds.
I would very much welcome that, Leader.
Could I just say, or respond? I understood that any more wind turbines at the moment not allowed under government rules because they are so divisive and unpopular. So I don't think we will be looking at that in the near future until I suppose things change or something else comes along that's less divisive.
Thank you. That's I note that, but the action plan is not consistent with that response. It indicates that preliminary work is underway to identify sites. So I would like a clear policy in terms of member wishes on this, what has been highly controversial area. Please understand, I am not against renewable energy, but I'm just very conscious that this has been a highly contentious subject and remains so in many parts of the borough. So I want to be absolutely clear and that this is with the blessing of members, if that's what they desire. I do think we need an early opportunity so that we fully understand the direction here, the direction of travel, so that we can all contribute to that debate and before we start committing things into a JLP. And I understand there will be consultation of the JLP, but I think we should have some sort of preemptive discussion to gather member feeling on whether this is a good way to proceed.
Thank you, Councillor. I agree with that. I don't know if Councillor Mock would like to add something with her JLP hat on.
Very much so. I'm curious to see how this is going through the JLP, because unless Councillor Pearce can remind me, I certainly don't remember being appraised of this at our recent meetings. And as I sit on the JLP board, it's not something that's been discussed through us currently. So I'm curious to see where that is. But it does also state that the brief is developed and ready for tender within this document. So I'm just curious why we seem to have progressed so far along that before we've had full member engagement on it. And just as an extra one, sorry, while I remember, can I ask what our current carbon footprint is?
Carbon footprint for the authority? Yeah, we'll just get that up. I think it's about 5,000 tonnes. I'll just double check quickly.
Mr. Powell.
Just a comment. I will have a word with Joe Lees from the JLP team and pull together a briefing note for members so you understand the context and the position. This is where we've tried to pull together from our action plan into our action plan actions that are going on elsewhere, so we've got it in one place. But I understand the concerns in terms of the wording in the action plan, and I'll come back and make sure members fully understand what that is, and then can speak to Joe Lees and the JLP team about any concerns they have. In terms of the carbon footprint, Adam will bring up the figure. We've got three elements of that: Scope 1, Scope 2 and Scope 3 emissions. So Scope 1 and Scope 2 are the emissions that we have direct control of. Use of energy, for example, gas we burn in boilers, electricity we use and so on. And then you've got Scope 3, which is the big bulk of that, which is down to our supply line, services we use and we buy in, and our procurement, which is the most difficult part to control. So what we're trying to do at the moment is work out how can we deal with the controllables, Scope 1 and Scope 2, and then in terms of Scope 3, that residual amount that we have little control over, what could we do about that in terms of potentially offsetting that through other activities, tree planting, various things like that. So that's the approach we take. I think Adam might have the figure for you.
Yes, it's 5,199 tonnes.
Per annum?
Yeah.
Thank you. Councillor Pearce, did you want to raise something in the context of the JLP?
Yes, Leader, I would. I'm as surprised at what I've heard here as Councillor Mott. I mean, this is certainly not something that we've been presented with at the board meetings, so far anyway. So it's a great surprise. I share Councillor Edmonds' concerns, I really do, and I think we need to be looking more at hydroelectric rather than wind turbines. And because, as some members will know and officers, Mary Tavy has a very successful hydroelectric scheme which is run by South West Water. And, you know, it's something that I think we should be promoting. And also wave power. I mean, there's so much energy in the oceans that this is something we should be looking at as well. My question was, if I may, Leader, 40% of our land area in West Devon is within the Dartmoor National Park Authority. How closely are officers working with the National Park in bringing forward these ideas? Because I've got a battle at the moment with a planning application in the National Park in my ward, which is going to could have a significant effect on our carbon footprint. And I have spoken to Mr. Powell about it. And, you know, we need to be aware of this, because if the National Park are not aware of what we're moving forward with, you know, those of us who have got wards within that fall within the National Park are really onto a bit of stick.
Thank you, Councillor Pearce. Mr. Powell.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, with respect to the specific issue we talked about, Councillor Pearce, that's something I'm taking up, as you know. And that's sort of relating to planning. Whether we control it through that, I don't know. But as all the authorities who've signed up to the Devon Climate Emergency have done, they've shared action plans. They're all together, so there is a sort of crossover. And I suppose the key stage for us now is, as we go through developing the corporate strategy, is that there will be a period over the summer where we will be sharing our corporate strategy with our key partners. We have constant conversations with DMP, but this will be specifically about what our corporate strategy says, what our ambitions are. We'll be listening to what their ambitions are and then making sure that there's cross-fertilisation between those two plans, where we can support and enable the ambition of the National Park and ours. They've got a commitment to be net zero by 2025 as an authority, so they'll certainly be interested in working together to achieve the same goals.
Thank you, Mr. Powell.
Thank you for that.
Councillor Crozier, do you have a question? More of a comment, Chair. The permits to pollute, which were mentioned by the gentleman behind me, with AD digesters. This is one of the big problems of society, because when the EEA started off many years ago, the only people that jumped on board with permits to pollute were basically the water authorities who controlled sewage. And they all got big permits to pollute. And for the last 30 years, they've been spending millions and millions of pounds on trying to control the pollution. It's still not under control. There's obviously still permits to pollute, and there's still permits to pollute being granted by the Sound of it. It does give me great concern that we're promoting something that may continue. Further to that, on wind power, I was reading an article yesterday saying how much solar and wind power the country produced in the last 3 months. And that was just the down payment. They expected wind power to double in the next 20 years. So that gives a measure of what the authorities or the industry is expecting to produce.
Thank you. I don't know, Mr. Powell, when you see the Environment Agency, whether you could take that point up with Alan Dobby, that would be really helpful. Councillor Cheeley, you had a question.
Thank you. Listening to the thread of other questions, mine's in very much a similar vein, but when I saw the first cut of the Climate Change Action Plan, I must have been 18 months ago, I think, but right at its birth, as it were, it seemed to have more columns in it. It seemed to have columns of sort of things we can do immediately, things that will be in the medium term, things that will be in the long term, and also things that we can do or things that we can try and convince other people to do. And I think that's what's missing here, and it would have taken a lot of the sort of sting out of some of the questioning, is if it was identified in this action plan those actions which are ours and ours alone to take, and if they are ours and ours alone to take, at which decision-making committee will those decisions be made? So is it a hub decision, is it a full council decision, etc. And also the decisions that are being made out with this council, but with this council's support perhaps, and that would be in the JLP box, possibly. And I think it would have helped considerably if we'd had those extra columns in this action plan so we all knew where we were. So my question really is that possible to develop this action plan so that we're confident we're talking about things that we can do without anyone else sort of involved, and things where we can put our shoulder to somebody else's wheel, as it were.
Thank you. Mr. Powell.
I think it's a very good observation, actually. I think this is obviously the action plan that members adopted. At the time, there was a delegation to me to make amendments, and we've shown that in red on the action plan. But I agree, I think we've lost a little bit of the track between what we're doing directly as an organisation and what we're doing with partners. And I think that would be helpful. Some of these are ambitions, they're things we're exploring because that's what members originally asked us to do. And we need to sort of take things off this as well as add things on. If there's a theme that members don't like a particular action, this is when the hub can make a recommendation that it's removed, which is absolutely fine. It needs to be a manageable list of deliverables, in my view. But certainly, we can take that on board, and for the next iteration in 6 months' time, we'll bring a more complex and separate between our powers and those that we'll be working with others.
Thank you. I think that would be really useful. Councillor Leach.
Yes, I'd like to go back to hydros. Constantly hearing about solar and wind, it was nice to actually see hydro somewhere on this. But my question is, when you next talk to the Environment Agency, can you ask them what their thoughts are on hydro? Because trying to get any hydro scheme going, well, it's extremely expensive. And considering the amount of water that we have drop on that sea, we should be trying to make the best of that. But it's the Environment Agency who tend to put blocks on most of it. So if you could come back with an answer as to whether we can help to promote that. Okay.
Thank you, Councillor Leach. Councillor Ewings.
Thank you, Leader. Some of my comments have actually been raised by Councillor Cheadle, in that knowing which parts of this plan belong to us, which are, have South Hams got the same plan, and are we falling in with some of theirs, and where is the Devon plan within this as well? And I think, as Councillor Cheadle says, we need to sort of have a column that says, this is them, and this is how it follows. I just find it difficult to grasp almost which bits we can actually control. And that to me, as a councillor for West Devon, is the primary thing I would want to see. I want to be able to go out and say to people, this is what we are going to do in West Devon. Yes, we have a JLP, and yes, South Hams are doing their own thing, Devon's doing its own thing, and nationally, people are doing their own thing. And goodness knows what's going to be decided by the end of the week. Carbis Bay might be making their own decisions. So we have all of that to factor into this report, which is quite a lot. So it's almost like if the top half of the report could just be West Devon, and then follow down afterwards with what others are doing, and to use Councillor Cheadle's expression, which shoulder we're going to rest on. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ewings. Mr. Powell.
Thank you. Just a couple of things on that. The Devon Carbon Plan is still out for consultation. So when that's actually adopted, then we would envisage quite a few of those actions that work towards the council's ambition and that wider ambition for Devon coming into the plan. The other thing is, I think what certainly the next stage is we've got our carbon footprint, we understand where we are. I've mentioned the scope 1, 2 and scope 3. What we need to do now is to start to do some carbon accountancy, carbon budgeting, where we actually say this measure will reduce our carbon footprint by this estimated tonnes of carbon. So we can start to look, and you'll be able to see our movement towards 2030, hopefully before, where we become a net zero authority. So that's sort of the next stage. It's a big piece of work, climate change and biodiversity, and it touches on everything. So I think within the next 6 months, you'll see some quite marked progress, and we'll take on board the comments from members to present it in a different way.
So, for example, with what you've just said there, and a really easy example is if we update some of our vehicle fleet, and you can say, we have got 2 new electric cars, this is what we are dropping, because that's a tangible, you know, for some of us who don't eat, sleep and breathe this, sorry, Lynn, we just need tangibles and realistic targets and things like that. So that would be great. Thank you, Drew.
Thank you. Any other questions, members? No other questions coming forward, in which case, Councillor Daniel, can I ask you to move the recommendation on your paper?
Can we have the mic on?
The recommendations are that the Hub Committee notes the progress against delivery of the adopted Climate Change and Biodiversity Action Plan.
Thank you. Can we have a seconder, please?
I'm happy to second that.
Councillor Cheadle. Members, we're into debate. Councillor Hipsey.
Thank you, Lee. I am fascinated by the debate on anaerobic digestion plants, AD plants. And I thank Councillor Mott for raising it, because I think it's a very important thing we need to consider in this report. And just as a supplement to Councillor Crozier's comment, according to Surface Against Sewage in 2020, there were in fact 400,000 licensed sewage discharges in the UK. That's without accidental or non-reported discharges. In fact, I believe 1 or 2 have been attributed to the AD plant, which we use for our food waste. I can't be sure about that. But basically, I would hate to think that we were adding anything to that 400,000 by our own efforts. I think that really does need looking at very, very closely.
Thank you, Councillor Hipsey. I'm sure that's noted. Councillor Cheadle.
Just a comment. Councillor Andrews, you have a regular column in the Tabby Times, Green Corner, I think it's called, or something like that.
Yes.
I think we just need to make, or you will need to make very clear when you're talking as the Green Corner lady, if I can put it that way, and when you're talking about your responsible hub role as climate change and biodiversity, the natural environment spokesman. Otherwise, people might read into something that you say in your column as West Devon policy, which hasn't actually been formally through the system. So it's just something to be, I think, aware of. I think it's great that you do communicate with the readers of the Tabby Times in the way you do, but we don't want them to mistakenly believe that you're sort of communicating West Devon policy when you're doing it.
I think I have an agreement with the editor that I keep it completely non-political. So I always say I, as if when I'm writing, so that it's in the first person, that people know that it's my opinions. And we don't tend to write anything that tends to be political. It tends to be quite a lightweight and sort of this is what ordinary people can do if they're concerned about biodiversity or the environment. But yes, I take your point. But I think, yes, I am aware that it needs to be completely non-political. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other debate, members? Councillor Edmonds.
Well, thank you, Chair. I perhaps feel I should contribute something in the final analysis and just reiterate that climate change and biodiversity is hugely important to me, and even more so for my 4 grandchildren. So in general, I agree with the action plan as is presented today, but with 1 or 2 exceptions, as I may have mentioned earlier. So I'll continue to monitor the content and progress of the action plan over the coming months and look forward to further debate as the plan evolves. Thank you.
Could I just respond to that? I would like to think that now that we have got a specific hub seat and that we will have an advisory group, that we can be looking at these things and making sure that the action plan we have is for West Devon and what we can achieve in the next few years, and try and differentiate between what we might be passing on to Devon County Council or doing in conjunction with them or other neighbouring councils, and what we're actually planning for ourselves. I think that's become quite clear today that our action plan needs a bit more structure to it in that way. So that's what I'm hoping to achieve, in the next few months. Thank you.
Sorry, Chair, can I just come back? And thank you, Councillor, for that comment. Just perhaps a final word, I agree with that, but I think we should also carefully consider the impact on our residents and indeed what they feel is acceptable and what they would like to see in terms of climate change mitigation. And I think we must be ever mindful of that. Our residents are the people have to live with the impacts of any plans that we agree to proceed with. So I would just ask that we were always mindful and consider the wishes of our residents in any action plan that we put forward.
Thank you, Councillor. Well, I would agree with that, and I think some of the comments that have been coming forward today show that this plan needs to be flexible, but also realistic and robust and targeted on what we can do and can deliver. So I'm sure that the advisory group, under the guidance of the lead member, will take that on board when they look at this and adapt it to bring back in due course. Any other debate, members? In which case, if we can move to a vote on the recommendation. All those in favour?
I believe it's just to note the report, Chair.
Noted. Thank you. Members, if we can move on to item 9. Item 9 is a paper about Devon Home Choice policy changes. Members will be aware that Devon Home Choice is the joint housing register for all local authorities in Devon. There was a consultation circulated to members in February suggesting some changes that might be brought forward. As a result of that, a number of changes to the policy have been made, and these are listed in the document that's in front of you. In particular, the changes provide for more flexibility in applying for properties that will improve a family's circumstances, even if they don't quite match their absolute need, and will ensure that houses are advertised using a maximum occupation rate rather than the bedroom need, which again should give more flexibility to individual families and allow them to improve their situation within the context of the home choice sphere. I don't know, is there anything else that we might want to raise in particular in terms of the policy? That sounds fine. So members, if you've managed to have a look at that policy, if you have any questions, we'll be pleased to field those. Any questions? Councillor Cheadle.
I'm about to tiptoe into territory that I've never been in before and I don't know anything about, but the bedroom tax. Would this change in some way make families liable for a tax that they previously weren't liable for?
If I may?
Please.
Your microphone's not on, I don't think.
Sorry. The change to the policy means that people would not be under-occupying, but they would be allowed to over-occupy, but by less than they were before. So it shouldn't impact on the bedroom tax. So they won't be affected by an under-occupancy charge.
Okay.
Yeah. They won't end up with surplus bedrooms. They will end up with perhaps 2 children occupying 1 bedroom rather than the other way around.
Yeah.
Yeah. Any other questions, members? No more questions coming forward, so I'd like therefore to move the recommendation that the Hub Committee agree the policy changes to Devon Home Choice from the 1st of July 2021. Members, we're into debate. Yeah, sorry, I'm doing well today, aren't I? Could I have a seconder, please?
I'll second that.
Thank you, Councillor Cheadle. Members, we're into debate. Councillor Pearce.
Thank you, Leader. I welcome these changes, actually, because it's been difficult in the past for appropriate accommodation to be available for families. And, I think this is a great step forward. It really is. So, as I say, I welcome them, and we will see how things go over the next 12 months or so, moving forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Pearce. Councillor Crozier.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I would concur with those comments from Councillor Pearce. I think it would add flexibility to the situation, and families involved in these sorts of moves would be a lot better off. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other debate, members? In which case, if we can move to a vote, all in favour of the recommendations.
That is 8 unanimous. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you, members. If we can move then to item 10 on your agenda papers, which is the Homeless Strategy Action Plan. So in front of you is a paper which sets out the Homeless Strategy Action Plan for next year. Members will be aware that the strategy was adopted in 2017 and is attached to the document at Appendix 1. In addition, we adopted a rough sleeping strategy in 2019, which is found at Appendix 2. The Action Plan report for 2020-21 is attached to Appendix 3, and if I can highlight a couple of issues from there. We generally made positive progress against targets, although COVID-19 has had some effect. Some 244 households in West Devon have been prevented from falling into homelessness, and additional benefits have been claimed amounting to around £216,000 for another 203 households. 12 rough sleepers were supported into long-term housing, and there has been a reduction of 46% in terms of nights spent in temporary accommodation. In addition, rent arrears through our Seymour Lettings agency have been managed and are currently at 0, and we have appointed a vulnerable persons officer. All of those, I think, are really good points that come out of the action plan. At Appendix 4 is the proposed action plan for 2021-2022, which contains targets aimed at understanding the true cost of homelessness, ensuring good access to services, increasing the supply, standards and options available to families, and seeking to protect and safeguard the most vulnerable in our society. More detailed targets are set out within the document, but I'm sure you'll agree these are very excellent objectives for us to aim for. So, members, with the action plan that's in front of you, do you have any questions that we would like to put to the officers? A question from Councillor Edmonds.
Well, thank you, Chair. Just a quick question on the new, the new action plan. It's on page 136, at the foot of page 136, HS2. What a coincidence. Obviously, I support anything that increases the availability of affordable homes. But establishing a housing company in the form of a community benefit society to enable and increase provision of affordable housing. Just not sure what that is. How would that work? Is that something we are able to do? Thank you.
Thank you. Mrs. Blake, I don't know whether you're able to answer that and whether it's anything to do with the community housing projects that we have underway or something separate to that.
It's a little bit of both. It's important that we're able to establish a company. The council, as you know, disposed of their stock some 24 years ago, I think. And since then, we haven't been able to own our own property. So this is about ensuring that we're able to manage these, that we're able to give non-secure tenancies for homeless people. And it's just a way in which we can manage this. There are reasons as to why we've gone with that particular model, which will probably come as a separate paper when we're in a position when we take all the advice we need to about becoming a company. But yeah, and part of it's around community housing ambitions.
That sounds very interesting. I'm encouraged by that. But presumably this overcomes any issues around the right to buy, which I think has always been a bit of a stumbling block with this kind of initiative.
Yes, when a council grants a secure tenancy, you are automatically giving somebody the right to buy. Through a community, through this kind of model, you would not do that.
Thank you. And just finally, timescales for perhaps bringing this forward. Further details.
Yeah, that's resource dependent. We're still seeking, as I'm sure you can appreciate, it's very specialist legal advice. So we are seeking that, and I would say within the next 12 months we will bring that paper back.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Mott.
Thank you. On page 113, you say that we've got our in-house letting agency has got 47 properties in South Hams. Do we not have any in West Devon?
We do. We have, I can tell you exactly how many, but we have under 10, I think. We're still building that portfolio. That's only been in place for 2 years. And for a short period of time, we took on a number of properties under the refugee scheme, which have since gone back into management by the landlords themselves as the refugees have settled and no longer need the additional support. So it is a fluctuating number. I can get you the exact number.
Thank you. And thanks, following on from Councillor Edmonds' comments, is there anything that we can do with regard to like the affordable housing provision? Because I'm very conscious that in my ward we've lost properties because the housing associations aren't prepared to take on small numbers of houses within a development, and therefore schemes that would have gone for Devon Home Choice have gone therefore to the rent to buy scheme. So we've lost out on properties. What can we do to help secure those properties so that we hang on to them and we don't lose affordable properties because of this?
Yes, there is a difficulty with attracting registered providers to more rural areas where there is only a small number of properties. We are seeking to address that through the housing strategy, through some of the conversations we will have ongoing through our housing enabling team in the future, to make sure that we're bringing forward exactly based on the housing need, both the products that are required for that rural community.
And how long is that going to take?
Well, I mean, some of the properties that have already gone through the viability, and there's not much we can do about those, but the ongoing issues we can seek to address that as and when they come up, starting immediately.
I can add just one small thing to that as well, that part of the aim of the sort of the Seymour side of things is that we are finding increasingly that we can't be reliant on the affordable housing sector for meeting all of our housing demands, and so we're really trying to push the private rented sector and drive down some of the rentals that landlords are prepared to accept by giving some incentives to try and plug some of those gaps as well, because it is increasingly difficult.
Thank you. I think it's a very complex picture, isn't it, with the various options that landlords might have these days, including private lettings and not forgetting Airbnb as well, which complicates the issue. Councillor Crozier.
Thank you, Chair. I was wondering if there's a conflict between this community enterprise benefit society and Seymour. You seem to be getting two strands. I don't know how they operate, or is there any conflict? There's a lot coming up in this conversation which I have no knowledge of, and I find it very difficult to understand, and I'm sure others are with me on that one.
So the rather than working in conflict, I think what they're actually going to end up doing is working very much together. It will be the same team of people managing the properties, so managing the rent accounts, managing the tenancies and any issues that arise out of those tenancies. The difference will be that some of those properties may belong to West Devon Borough Council and be managed via the Community Benefit Society, and some of those properties will be owned by private landlords and managed by the same people, but under the scope of the Seymour lettings.
Right, okay.
So it's purely the ownership of the property, not the management, right, and the management will be carried out by the same people.
So if they go into the community benefit company, they're outside the scope of right to buy, is that right?
Yes.
Yes,
yes, it is, yeah.
I can't hear the nod of the head.
No, the reflections, I mean, I can see you perfectly. I bet you can't see me at all, can you?
For the benefit of everybody else.
Councillor Jury, if it would help, we could offer members a session on affordable housing and all the different terminology that I could ask Alex Rahag to organise.
I'm glad you've suggested that. I was thinking that would be probably a good time to do that and offer a workshop or something along those lines. So if that could be organised, that would be excellent. Councillor Pearce, and then I've got a couple of questions from the floor.
Thank you, Leader. Forgive me if I've missed something in response to Councillor Edmonds about this, but establishing the housing company in the form of a community benefit society, will this be to build units, or will we be taking on the affordable housing that's been provided by developers in rural areas? That's my first question.
There's a variety of approaches. So for one, we are shortly going to be applying for some money to help us to purchase some properties for Housing First. We may at various points choose to invest in property because the return is quite good when you're looking at rental returns, and we may take some of those properties as the contribution side. In terms of the nuts and bolts of it, once it's with me, that would be managed by myself. In terms of the contributions coming forward, that will be working in partnership with the affordable housing team and Alex Rahag and part of those negotiations. So in terms of getting to the nitty-gritty of that bit of it, that's not going to be within my realm of expertise, but I can certainly find out more for you if you wanted some more detail.
Thank you for that. My second question is relating to my concerns over private landlords, and I'm not being derogatory to private landlords here, but we know from other parts of the country that there are major issues in the private rented sector, and the concerns are that if we're relying too much on this, even though you're negotiating lower rents at the moment, if at some point in the future we do get steady increases in interest rates, and these people have bought these properties on buy-to-let, and they have to increase their repayments, the rental is bound to go up. So, you know, are you making provision for that? Or, you know, is it in the back of your mind for the future? Because I'm a strong believer in that we need to be looking at building the old style council houses, you know, where you had good quality accommodation, and whatever central government says here about everybody being homeowners in this country, you know, there are people that will never be in a position to own their own home, and therefore we need to be providing high quality rented property, you know, which, you know, we have control of. And it always amazed me, when I was working in Europe years ago, when I had a proper job, Germany, which was the most successful economy in Europe, only had 38% home ownership. And that surely must tell everybody something, that, you know, you provide good quality housing for those people who cannot get on the property ladder. And a chap said to me the other day, a couple of weeks ago, and he said, I'm really pleased. He said, I've paid off my mortgage, and now I'm saving up for my time in a residential home. So, you know, it's the money that is having to be dealt with. It's a significant amount of people's income that's going towards the mortgages and you know, other forms of payment. So, you know, I think we need to be looking at having good quality rented accommodation. And if central government aren't happy with providing that, and we're not getting the proper ones from developers, we need to be working down this way ourselves. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you, Councillor Pearce. Councillor Hipsey.
Thank you, Leader. Fascinating report with really lots of really good things in it. I particularly like some of the provisions in the rough sleeper appendix, and I draw your attention to a passage within that appendix which addresses access to services. This basically says that we intend to introduce intensive outreach service to enable the council to talk to rough sleepers. Some of you may remember that in the early days of my service with this council, I tried to do this myself with very limited results. I think it's a great thing to do. Find the rough sleepers, talk to them, find out what their needs are, and in my short experience, it's certain that those requirements are really, they're always complex. They're never straightforward. So I'd welcome this idea. I think it's really good. I would, however, question, the question I have is who is going to do this? I'm trying to avoid the use of the term manpower, but where are the people who are going to provide this outreach service going to come from?
I think Mrs. Blake can answer that.
Yes, we were successful for a government bid that was specifically for rough sleeper outreach, and we've had an extension of that bid based on COVID, and at some point we will analyse all the work, some of which is in front of you. The individual doing that role is really responsive. It means that we can get out really quickly and make contact where we can from reports that we have from members of the public, get straight to it, speak to them, find out if they've got anywhere to go, what their issues might be, how we can help them, assist them inside, and work with them really intensively to break that cycle as quickly as we can. That is a temporary post at the moment, but we're hopeful that we've got enough of a case that we may be able to bring that back as a potential business case for an increase to the establishment at some stage.
If I may, Leader, just respond. Thank you very much, Izzy. That sounds very encouraging. Can I ask if that, I think we talk about one post here, is that going to be shared with South Hams?
Yes. because of we're fortunate in West Devon in that we have a very low number of rough sleepers. South Hams has a more significant issue, and between that post is shared between the two and is enough resource. There are occasions where we have to pull on additional resource, when we have to, send dual workers out for safeguarding and risk assessments, but that is sufficient resource, yeah.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Councillor Ewings.
Thank you very much. I was going to ask, with this establishing of this housing company, is that going to take on properties, for example, that are going to be built in Brent Hall by us, and then are we going to take them on? And going back to the private lettings that we were talking about, I was reading the other day that apparently a lot of private landlords are actually selling properties around here because the price has gone up so much at the moment, and it's easier to grab the money than it is to deal with tenants. So the private lettings market is becoming more and more difficult, and it's forcing the rents up, which is no doubt what our housing officers are now seeing, because the amount of housing benefit we can provide is not tallying with what the current rents are around this area. So two questions there, really.
Mrs. Blake?
I think it would probably be easier to have the community housing and the housing company come back as a complete report, because there's lots of elements, and we could discuss that all day, and we haven't quite bottomed out all of the things that could do. Ultimately, we want it to be as flexible as possible, to give us as many opportunities as possible within rural areas, and wherever really we can intervene to make sure that property is brought forward for local people in housing need. So I think probably the best way to approach this is to bring back a more complete report. And as for the private rented sector, I completely agree, Councillor Ewings. It's getting more and more difficult for people to access private rented affordable accommodation. And we're seeing this across the borough, across Devon, really. We're seeing this issue as more people have got more flexibility about moving out, or they're not tied so much to where they live. So lots more people are working from home, so can live in the countryside and not worry so much about their commute. We're also seeing landlords take advantage of it's a seller's market right now, so they can leave the market very, very easily at quite significant benefits. So yeah, things are against us. We've also got, issues, as this is the homeless strategy, we've got significant issues with temporary accommodation. We're really finding that a challenge to find alternative private to temporary accommodation. Right now, we're having to go quite far afield, hence the need for facilities such as Spring Hill to keep people local when they're in a really low point in their lives. So, yeah, it's lots of work for certain, lots of work.
Thank you. Any other questions, members? In which case, I'd like to move the recommendation that the Hub Committee approves the Homelessness Strategy Action Plan 2021-22 be adopted with effect from the 1st of April 2021. Members, we're into debate. Oh, yes, I've gone and done it again, haven't I? Could I have a seconder, please?
And that.
Thank you. Councillor Mott. Nothing beats keenness. Okay?
I think, Chair, the sooner we can get something sorted out, if only so that we can sort out the loss of the affordable housing for our residents that we're seeing with developments at the moment, the better.
Thank you. I think that's absolutely right. And there are some opportunities that we have that I think is it's very important we bring forward as quickly as possible and as effectively as possible. So we'll be working on those as well. Thank you. Any other debate, members? In which case we'll move to a vote. All in favour of the recommendation?
That's unanimous. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you. Thank you, members. That brings today's business to a close. So thank you for your attendance and your contribution, and thank you to all those officers that are here and have contributed. And